So it's 18:21. We're doing okay for time. So we've got 39 minutes left. And it's my great pleasure then to be introducing our third speaker. We're switching continents, going over to Chicago now, so a little earlier in the day. It's Debbie Reynolds. Debbie's a global data privacy and protection expert strategist. I should say privacy, shouldn't I, really, to be in keeping with Debbie. She's talking about the realities and impact of data monetization on data privacy. So Debbie's got a wonderful nickname, the Data Diva, and she's a world-renowned technologist, thought leader, and advisor to multinational corporations for handling global data privacy. She's an internationally published author, a highly sought-after speaker, she most definitely is, and a top media presence about global data privacy, data protection topics. We've been following Debbie now for a number of weeks, and as we've been talking to her about this event, more and more people have been following her, and I've had, Debbie, so many messages. People say, wow, Debbie posts some amazing stuff. So you've already been building up a fan base, Debbie, with the content you've been sharing on social media and LinkedIn as we've been following you for the last few weeks. It's wonderful to see you here. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. This has been fascinating. I love all the discussion, and this is the right discussion for the right time. So I'm really thrilled to be part of this community.
Well, we're very grateful you're here, Debbie. It's very much your stage. The time is 18:23. It's yours for 20 to 30 minutes, including some time for questions.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm going to share my screen. I decided to do some slides to keep myself on point here. You see my screen?
We see it, yes.
Okay. You've already introduced me, so I'll skip that part of things. So as we know, a lot of people are on the internet, right? And a lot more people are going to be on the internet. So this creates, more data to protect, more data to think about, more ways in which individuals will be adding data to the internet. So it's always something that we have to think about. Also, the worldwide data privacy regulations are only increasing. So I think even though data privacy is not a new concept, when the GDPR came on board and they introduced these things about fines, it became more of a C-suite issue. So now we're seeing a lot of other nations and countries enacting different types of data privacy regulations around the world. So this is an issue that's not going to go away. It's going to create a bit more friction, I think, in the world in terms of how companies handle data and how users share their data with companies. All right. So in the data privacy space, there has been a debate about whether data monetization should happen or not. My idea is that it is inevitable. So it's really not an issue of whether it should happen or not. It's whether you're going to participate or not in data monetization. We're seeing governments creating spaces, like even in Europe with the data strategy, where there may be some level of monetization, whether that be back to the individual or sharing data to or from the government with businesses. And then we're going to start to see more incentives to have people share data. So a lot of the data privacy regulations are around what a person can do with their data, like what data agency they have in terms of being able to consent or withdraw consent for the use of their data. And then as people try to comply with these privacy rules, there are a couple of things in the privacy rules that are going to sort of starve certain companies of data. They're going to have to find alternative ways to be able to get data, and that to me goes right into monetization. Let's see. All right, so let's talk about the rise of first-party data. So companies that have a first-party relationship with an individual, that's really what they want. So that's the holy grail of data sharing. So you have a customer, they're sharing data with you. If you're what we're seeing a lot of big companies do, what they're doing is they're moving into a lot of different markets. So they're expanding their base of services. So then you're consenting to more and more data sharing in single places. The data privacy regulations around the world are really focused on having data tied to purpose. So I think in the past, a lot of data gathering has been, let's gather as much data as we can, and then we'll figure out what the purpose is. So what the data privacy regulations around the world now are saying, you have to have a purpose before you collect the data. And part of that purpose is deciding when you should get rid of the data as well, because we have a huge data retention problem. I call it hoarders, the corporate addiction, where we have corporations just gathering or amassing so much data. So on a going forward basis, companies are going to need to be able to tie data to purpose. What we're going to see is expanding the data purpose in terms of expanded products and services. So let's say, for example, what we are seeing now, what we will continue to see is some of these big companies go into things like health or finance. So like, I can't remember, is it Google that bought Fitbit? So if Google knows everything about you, is following you all over the internet, on your phone, in your car, all this other type of stuff, having a new relationship with them where you have Fitbit and they're collecting information that you agreed to, and they can, combine that information if they want to, because you have this, you have an umbrella of services that they offer, and them as a single company can share that data within the company. So we're going to see a lot more of that. All right, so there's a problem with third-party data, and this gets interpreted a lot in a lot of different privacy laws. So I think most famously in the GDPR, where they have a distinction for a data controller and a data processor, we're seeing that relationship be codified in other data privacy laws, even if they're not called that by name. So basically they're saying a first party company or data controller has a responsibility, and as does a third party company. So what's happening is, with the data privacy regulations, governments are turning up the heat on companies that collect first party data and how that transfer of that first party data happens to third parties. So we know that in advertising that many of these, some of these companies are selling data to third parties, maybe indiscriminately. And probably one of the most famous examples of this is the Facebook Cambridge Analytica situation, where Facebook basically gave Cambridge Analytica an opening to collect massive amounts of data on individuals. And then Cambridge Analytica took that data and created psychological profiles and retargeted people with like political ads and things like that. So part of the reason why this data controller and data processor role is important is because it puts skin in the game for the first party data holder or data controller about the types of data they give to people and why they do it. And then the third party also has a responsibility as well in terms of their use of the data. So another thing is a big issue with third party data sharing we're seeing is with cyber risk. So there's a lot of cyber breach risk happening, and we're seeing a lot of that, not only with companies on a first party basis, but a lot of them with third party. So maybe they've given some type of access to someone, and the person was able to either have more access than they should, or were able to exfiltrate or infiltrate an organization in a way that made it harmful to them. So that's another reason why people are looking very closely at third parties. Also, profiling individuals without their consent or knowledge. So some of this data sharing that has been happening for advertising is not apparent to the individual, whether it be cookies or not. Not all companies can track people or find out information about them without cookies. So to me, it's a little bit perplexing, a lot of the cookie litigation around the world, because cookies are not necessary to do the type of tracking that is happening with third parties. All right. So I always toy around with this idea, which is the complexity of consent. So consent from a business perspective is like the last or the lowest of the low hanging fruit, or the least favorable way that you want to have to get permission to use data. So you want to find any other legal basis besides consent. But companies that are doing business to consumer, have a business to consumer relationship, especially companies like Apple, they're really going after consent as opposed to these other legal purposes, because they want to be able to give people more transparency. And also the idea that people can revoke consent. So the revocation of consent has been a huge problem with businesses, because a lot of the data systems that they have and they've built aren't built to forget. They're built to remember. So being able to have privacy by design, or design products where it makes it easy for people to consent or revoke consent is very, very important. Also, there's an asymmetrical value exchange when you are using a free service from a company. So let's say for instance, let's say Facebook makes $1,500 a year from you as a user, and you have a free service from them. So on the flip side, would you pay $1,500 to Facebook to use it? And most people would say no, they wouldn't. So because of the fact that some of these services are free, the exchange for the consumer can be very asymmetrical. So the sky is almost the limit to what you can consent. So I say you can't sell your organs, probably, right? Because that's illegal. But beyond that, the sky's the limit in terms of what you can get people to consent to. So we're probably going to see a lot more, strange things that we'll be asked to consent to, and a lot of people, it'll be buried in terms of service or privacy policies, and people just say yes. The products and services will expand, as I said, to change consent over time. So let's say you found an app that you like, you download it, it does the exact thing that you want to do, and then they start adding more and more services and different features. And after a while, you're consenting to more and more stuff, where maybe now the app doesn't do what you want it to do, but you've consented to all this stuff. So one example I would give of that is probably like WhatsApp, where WhatsApp has changed over the years in terms of what it was, its initial purpose. So people who signed up for WhatsApp initially before it was bought by Facebook liked the fact that it was very simple, and it kept their data private. But now, since Facebook has bought WhatsApp, they've added more and more services, more and more hooks, more and more things. And now this app, people feel like it's turned out to be something that maybe they would not have otherwise agreed to in the beginning. So we're seeing people either try to not use WhatsApp or to use other types of messaging apps as a alternative. But this is going to be a thing that's going to happen a lot, where it's almost like scope creep in a way, where the apps are trying to expand what the purpose of the data collection that they're having. Consent changes and requests during the customer journey. So this is tricky, and I think there's going to be a lot of litigation around this in the years to come. So This means that, let's say, for instance, you go on Google, and Google has like the section that you go in, and it has you change your privacy settings and things like that. But as you're doing things, on the internet or on your phone, you may be changing those permissions or changing your consent through time. So let's say you're out and about and you get lost or something. You want to use Google Maps, but in your checkup center in Google, you told them you don't want them to track your location. But at that moment, you may say, yes, track my location. And that may actually undo all the other stuff that you had done in this other privacy center. So that's a concern as well. Um, Limiting third-party data transfer. This is going to be a big deal. We're already seeing Apple and Google try to do this as it relates to third-party data exchange. They want to shift the risk of third-party data exchange more to the third party, where so Apple or Google would give um, advertisers less granular information about an individual, and then the advertiser, it would be on incumbent upon them to try to get consent from the individual. So one way that I think that this consent thing will happen with third parties will be monetization. So if companies can't adjust to this new way of getting data for advertising, I consider it an extinction level event for some of those companies, but others will adapt or they'll come together in a way so that they are not making a third party data transfer. One example of this is Google owns YouTube. So if Google transfers data to YouTube, it's not considered a third party transfer because they own YouTube. So we're going to see a lot of companies try to bring other services under their umbrella. So they're expanding the scope of what you'd be able to consent to. All right. So what is the data privacy impact on monetization? I think there's a very high value for a first party relationship with the consumer. And I think that those companies that have those first party relationships, especially if you trust them, people will share more data with less companies. So that would be one thing. So, and it'll put more pressure on third party advertisers to obtain consent from individuals. And I think part of that incentive will be money in some way, some monetary exchange in exchange for your consent over time. So, well, that's it. I just wanted to make sure we had time for questions.
Thanks so much, Debbie. I think this was really the kind of things that we should look at when it comes to data monetization, the consent. We know that all the time data is getting collected, and it is going to be inevitable that monetization takes place. But what's important, whether we are going to be a participant into it or not, and companies need to start thinking if they are first party processors or whether third party, how they need to take the consent into consideration, collect what is necessary, and also give the monetary awards to people if they are really interested to sell the data. It is very important that the data controller and the processor now looks at regulations and the data privacy as a whole, not just the monetization part of it, and tie back the purpose whole, how the data is getting processed each day, not just the third party but first party, but also the third party. Because I think identity theft is profiling, identity theft is something which is happening to a lot of people. I think that is one reason we need to look at the privacy aspects, not just the monetization. This is what I would really want to summarize, and I would go on to some of the questions that we have. So first question is from Paul. Is privacy, according to Mark Zuckerberg, who no longer says this publicly, immoral?
Is privacy immoral?
Yeah, that's what, yeah.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think, privacy should be, in my opinion, a fundamental human right from cradle to grave. So, you should be able to have some agency over your information and your data. I tell people, even though I talk about data privacy and I work at the intersection of technology and privacy, privacy existed before computers. So it can't be a thing where now that we brought in computers that privacy shouldn't exist or we shouldn't care about it. These are fundamental rights that people should have. Unfortunately, in the US, privacy is not considered a fundamental human right as it is in the EU, and that's something I'm really pushing for in the US. It should be something that belongs to the person that they can't give away. But when people are consenting to things, you aren't necessarily giving away your privacy in a way, your right to privacy. So that right belongs to you. The problem happens when the data is being used in ways that you are not aware of and it's not transparent to you and you're not able to say no. So that's, that is the problem. There's kind of a shadow industry of people who collect and trade data and it's not transparent to you what's happening. And then there may be decisions that are made about you that are harmful that you wouldn't even know came from that information.
This is Paul here. Can I just add to my question? Just because
Sure,
I was asking it slightly differently. Yeah, Debbie, what it was that in the early days of Facebook, particularly, I mean, not the very early days, the rhetoric of Mark Zuckerberg was he was using moral language, which is very convenient to Mark Zuckerberg and his company, but kind of pointing out to the fact that if we had an entirely transparent world, we wouldn't have wars, and it's privacy that creates uncertainty and so on. And of course, what he's done is he's perhaps conveniently mistaken privacy for secrecy.
Right.
And that kind of stuff. But we've been having conversations in MKI about ethics and AI and, what might a declaration of human rights for humans and robots be like. And in science fiction stories, there are quite a few that take a utopian view that the first real kind of self-operating robots who might be demonstrating self-awareness might be the first race on Earth that practices total transparency. And when one robot meets another, they can download each other entirely. And you might even have a future where we donate identity rather than protect it. And of course, that's philosophically all different, but it's just interesting. He's quiet on it now, but that original kind of vision for social media from him, which I think is a bit twisted, was the idea that it's morally abhorrent to maintain privacy because it creates an insecure, mistrusting world, hence Facebook.
Yeah, I don't think that's a good correlation.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't correlate the two together. There's a difference between privacy, secrecy, confidentiality, privilege. Those are all different terms. They mean different things. So people sometimes confuse those things.
I'll move on to the next one. So Neeraj has asked two questions. So let me ask the first one. Have you seen any instances of a data monetization initiative gone bad when it is treated as a technical challenge rather than an asset utilization issue?
That's a good question. I've not yet seen the data monetization models go bad. I mean, right now, so data monetization has been happening for a while, but the issue is that the monetization has not benefited the consumer to this point. So I think that people are trying to build technologies that help people have agency and be able to monetize or get some benefit as opposed to the benefit going to someone else. So I've not seen that yet. I think we're still early yet on how these different models will work. There are a lot of people who are creating technologies right now to be able to do that in different ways, whether that be some, incentive cards or, pay direct payments to the person over time for certain types of data. But I don't know. I think I'm a little concerned that I think data is creating a caste system in the world right now. So people who have data and have insights will have more agency in the world, and people who don't won't. So let's say, Warren Buffett is very rich, so he probably doesn't want to monetize his data. But someone who is living paycheck to paycheck or is not earning a living wage, maybe they'd be more incentivized to sell their data, which I think creates an imbalance. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, I think I'll leave it up to Neeraj to evaluate further. He has further question on it. Which is a bigger challenge in data monetization? Getting the business case for investment in this initiative, or the technical challenges of data extraction, cleansing, etc.?
Oh, that's a good question. I think they're both an issue. One is trying to get an organization to embrace data monetization. Some of them will be forced to do so, because if they can't do it, they may not be able to earn money like they were before. Before it was more of a free for all, and they can get as much data they wanted and stuff like that. So companies have models where they would lose money or not be able to earn money. They're going to be forced into data monetization. Then other companies where they get to pick and choose, I think that they want to have the widest offerings possible, and they want to have the most data possible. So they want to be able to find ways to entice customers to be able to give them information. So I think for companies that are thinking in that way, I think it'll be easier. It won't be a forced choice, but it'll be something that will maybe add a feather to their cap, so to speak. We're seeing, when PayPal started offering cryptocurrencies, I thought, okay, this is it now. This is, we've reached the pinnacle in a way that, crypto now has more legitimacy, because now we see all these banks trying to figure out how to use it, how to go into it, even though I think the importance of crypto to me is about identity. So tying the identity of the person to something. So even if let's say you had a penny worth of cryptocurrency in a wallet, and they could identify who you were, I feel like that's almost the most valuable thing that a company could have, because they don't have that now. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah. I think that was a very good answer, I would say. And in terms to what Jack also had mentioned, there's one question: what are the third-party privacy regulators on student data?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So student data is a little bit different. So around the world, there are more strict guidelines about what happens to data of individuals that are minors. So in the US, they're kind of like steps. So certain things happen to you when you're 13, 16, 18. In Europe, I think it's like Europe and the UK, 16, certain things happen. The regulations are more strict on what advertising can happen with minors, and this goes to parental consent. Like let's say for instance, like Facebook right now. Right now, they say they have a little button that says you can't use Facebook if you're under 13. So, but they have no idea whether the parent actually checked that box or not, right? It's just there legalistically to say, okay, we asked the question and you answer it. So it doesn't mean that the person isn't 13. It just means that someone clicked the box and they've done their due diligence and stuff like that. One interesting thing that's happening now is that Facebook and some other companies are looking to create social media things for children under 13. So, this is a bit concerning, right? Because again, it's hard to know whether the parent has actually consented or not. And if they have, again, we have this asymmetrical relationship again, where the company is probably gaining more value from the individual than the individual gets from the service. So I think that's going to be an interesting development.
I think that's very important to know, that how the data is going to be protected with respect to young children, vulnerable population. That is going to be something that companies will have to consider, not just monetization, I think, to be honest. There are a few more questions. Let me ask them. So Lavina has asked, how do we ensure we value data amongst its fair, even though it's influenced by diverse set of human species?
I'm sorry, ask it one more time.
How do we ensure the value of data amongst is fair, even though it's influenced by diverse set of human species?
I don't know. I think that's probably the question for the ages. How do we make it fair? How do we make it even? How do we extract biases out of things? How do we, I have an issue with people trying to humanize AI because I feel like a machine can't really be ethical, in my opinion. So I think the ethics has to come from a human. It can't come from a artificial intelligence. So I like to say the way that some people are putting forth AI is like a teddy bear, but it's really a grizzly bear. So we need to really get on board with what exactly it is the AI is doing, and then having it be fair is making sure that it doesn't have harms on individuals that maybe were not part of the testing and things like that. So fairness in terms of being able to make sure that diverse groups are not impacted harmfully, and not pretend like that can't happen. So an example I like to give to people is like, blood transfusions. So when someone has a blood transfusion, you have to find out what their blood type is, and then they can get a blood transfusion. But the way that some AI is being implemented is like, okay, I have a blood type O, and then we're gonna just throw this on. Everyone has, I want to pretend like everyone has a blood type O, and people die is okay because I tested on me and it worked. It can't be that way. We have to figure out. We have to be more detailed in how we go about these things and see how they're being implemented across the world.
Yeah, I think that definition of fairness is what people should start looking at, and of course the transparency aspect also ties up. There are few more questions. I just have a couple of minutes before Richard summarizes as well. So Anna has asked, terms and conditions right now force you to consent. How can that be changed? I think this is an important one.
Yeah, this is an important one. Yeah, it's hard. I think the way the stance that the companies are taking is you either take it or leave it. So you accept everything that we ask, or you don't use the products. And for products that are smart, that are competing in that area, maybe they want to take a different tone, or have more granularity in terms of how people consent to things, so that they aren't in that same boat. But I think it's my way or the highway is kind of the way things are being done. Again, this is, to me, part of this free software or free service thing, where again, the asymmetry is just off the charts. But let's say, for instance, if you pay for a service, it may be more even in terms of the exchange, because you can really quantify it. But in a free service, you really can't. It's almost impossible to quantify the value to an individual.
Absolutely. This is so important to know. And this would be the last one I would take. What future for existing data aggregators, specifically credit reference agencies like Experian, Equifax, if regulatory trajectory of privacy or ID continues, would that damage US credit industry?
Think so. The credit industry is as decades ahead of other companies in terms of how they're doing these risk modeling. So basically, what we're seeing with places like Google, who are doing this flock, to me, running someone's credit report is like a flock, in my opinion. So basically, they're taking your information, but then they're also matching you against a model of other people who are anonymous, right? To try to make a decision about you. So I think that, you know, because they're so far ahead, and especially in the US, or, you know, finance is very more heavily regulated industry than some of the other industries. So there are a lot of things that they've sort of ironed out. But I think the problem with credit agencies as it relates to data is now they have so much more data that they don't necessarily have to tell you that they have. So let's say, for instance, you're on Facebook and they show you drinking a beer or whatever. A data broker could take that information and say, you know, we know you have a credit file for this person. We think they are a beer drinker. You know, what if someone says, okay, this person's alcoholic or something? How would you know that? You would not know that someone has made an inference based on something that you publicly shared with them. And they don't have to tell you that they got this information from a data broker, because in theory, if it's public, then you don't have any expectation of privacy over the information, and you don't know the inferences that are being made. So I think, you know, the credit agencies, again, are way ahead on this risk modeling and stuff. But the danger is now they're getting data that is not transparent to you or me. You know, it's different where they say, oh, we're going to deny you credit because, you know, we got this information from this person that you didn't pay a bill. That's different. Where they're saying maybe we shouldn't give this person a loan because we infer that they're going to turn into an alcoholic, and they would never tell you that.
Yeah, they're able to identify you or relate to the parameters to you. Absolutely. I think that is what profiling and identity hack will do in the future. Definitely. I think, Debbie, I have you know, covered all of the questions that I can see. And thank you so much for your wonderful talk. I can't mention, it has been so insightful and raised so many questions in my mind too. And we need to look at those aspects which we have not considered so far with technology, privacy, and the consent that we are giving to so many people on so many apps, be it news or anywhere else. It's not just Facebook, but every place. So thank you for it. And over to you, Richard, for summarizing.
Oh, thank you so much, Jaisal. Debbie, it's like Wikipedia in your head. It's just this expanse of incredible understanding and knowledge. Thank you so much for the opportunity to tap into it and ask some questions. Just amazing, Debbie. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. This was fantastic.